Step out of the line. The command cut through the low hum of the airport terminal. Hundreds of travelers, weary with luggage and preoccupied with departure gates, turned their heads toward the scene. A tall black man in a gray suit stood frozen, his passport in hand. His eyes darted around as two uniformed staff members advanced on him, their expressions hard with suspicion. "Sir, you don't belong here," one of them barked. The man's chest tightened. He had been through airports on 3 continents, but this moment felt different. He wasn't just being questioned, he was being accused. Accused of existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Some passengers looked away, pretending not to notice. Others leaned forward, phones half-raised, sensing that something worth recording was about to unfold. But none of them knew the truth. This man they were pulling out of line, humiliating in front of strangers, wasn't just a traveler. He was the sitting minister of transport of his country. Meet Marcus Ellison, a 48-year-old black American who carried himself with the calm dignity of a man who had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and climbed too high to be shaken easily. To the casual eye, he was just another business traveler. The tailored suit, the briefcase, the watch with its subtle gleam, nothing flashy, just precise. He was in Washington, D.C., about to board a flight for an international conference on aviation policy. Marcus wasn't merely attending. He was scheduled to give the keynote address. World leaders, CEOs of major airlines, and government ministers from across the globe would be there. And yet, here he was standing in line at security, being told, loudly, publicly, that he did not belong. The irony, almost too bitter to swallow, was that Marcus had spent the last 3 years of his career pushing to make air travel more inclusive, more equitable, safer for marginalized people who too often felt unwelcome in the skies. And now, in front of his own citizens, in the capital of his own country, he was reduced to nothing but suspicion. This story is not just about Marcus. It's about the invisible weight that black travelers carry, even when they have titles, power, and prestige. It's about what happens when prejudice collides with authority, and when the person everyone underestimates holds far more power than they imagine. Stay with me until the end, because the fallout from this moment didn't just embarrass an airport. It shook an entire nation. Marcus Ellison had grown up with the hum of trains in his ears and the sight of buses rolling down cracked city streets as his childhood backdrop. He was born in Baltimore, the second son of a nurse and a dockworker. His parents didn't have much, but they had a vision that their children would go further than they ever could. And Marcus had always been curious about the way people moved. As a child, while others played stickball in the alley, he would stand at the corner and watch the buses. He memorized their routes, the way passengers shuffled on and off, the frustrated sighs when schedules ran late. "Why do people get so mad at buses, Mama?" he once asked his mother. She laughed, pushing a loose curl behind her ear. "Because, baby, buses are supposed to take you where you need to go. When they don't, people feel stuck." That word, stuck, stayed with him. Stuck was what his parents felt every time bills piled higher than paychecks. Stuck was what his older brother felt when he couldn't afford college. Stuck was what his neighbors felt when job interviews were on the other side of the city, but the bus lines didn't reach them. And Marcus decided, even as a boy, that he would dedicate his life to making sure people never felt stuck again. By the time he was in high school, Marcus was already winning science fairs with projects on transportation efficiency. His teachers noticed his drive. His coach saw how he studied not just the game on the basketball court but the patterns of the game, the spacing, the movement. "Ellison," his coach told him once, "you see the floor like it's a map." A map, yes. That was the way Marcus's mind worked. Every problem was a network, a series of routes, and there was always a better, faster, fairer way through it. Marcus earned a scholarship to Howard University, where he majored in civil engineering. It wasn't easy. There were days when he ate ramen noodles twice a day, stretching his work-study paychecks to cover books and rent. But every summer, he interned at city planning departments. He learned the language of policy, the bureaucracy that turned blueprints into actual roads, buses, and train lines. Still, Marcus never forgot what it felt like to sit on a broken-down bus with the AC rattling above his head, sweat dripping down his neck, wondering if he'd make it on time to class. That memory burned in him like fuel. By the time he was 35, Marcus had worked his way through various government roles, from urban transit analyst to deputy commissioner. And when a new administration came into power, recognizing both his brilliance and his relentless work ethic, he was appointed Minister of Transport. For his parents, it was the proudest day of their lives. His mother cried quietly during the swearing in ceremony, whispering, "Look at my baby. Look at how far he's come." But Marcus knew, even as the cameras flashed and congratulations poured in, that titles didn't erase prejudice. He had sat in too many boardrooms where his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. He had endured too many backhanded compliments. "You're so articulate, Marcus." He had smiled through too many airport lounges where staff questioned whether his premium ticket was really his. Perhaps that's why he loved and hated airports in equal measure. "I loved them because they represented movement, progress, and possibility. Hated them because they revealed, more starkly than anywhere else, the subtle ways black travelers were made to feel unwelcome." Marcus remembered one incident years earlier, when he was a mid-level official flying home from a conference in Chicago. A gate agent had stopped him. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked, eyeing his first-class boarding pass. He smiled politely and said yes, but inside, the question carved a wound. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" It was a question he'd been asked his whole life. In classrooms, in boardrooms, in restaurants. Now, in the gleaming halls of airports. Always the same undertone, "You don't belong here." And yet, Marcus had pushed through, rising higher and higher, determined to belong not just in the room but at the head of the table. And so, on that morning in Washington, as he approached the security line, he carried with him not just a passport and a ticket, but a lifetime of memories. Some proud, some painful. He had been invited to deliver the keynote on equitable skies, building inclusive transportation for the future. His speech would highlight how transportation wasn't just logistics, it was justice, access, freedom. Little did he know, before he even reached the gate, his very presence in that airport would put those words to the test. Because when the security agent's eyes locked onto him, suspicion overtaking professionalism, Marcus knew exactly what was about to happen. And the hum of the terminal seemed to quiet as the words rang out. "Sir, step out of the line." The command echoed louder this time, slicing through the low rumble of the terminal. A hush fell over the cluster of passengers nearby. Marcus felt dozens of eyes burn into his back. He swallowed, his pulse steady but rising. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face the agent. The man was young, maybe early 30s, with a badge clipped to his chest and a smirk pulling at the corner of his lips. Behind him stood another staffer, a woman with her arms folded tight, as though she had already made up her mind about Marcus's guilt. "I'm sorry," Marcus asked, his voice even. "You heard me?" the agent said, stepping closer. "Step out of the line. We need to check something." Marcus's grip tightened on his passport. "I've already been screened. I've done nothing wrong." The woman cut in sharply. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just step aside." Around them, the line shuffled awkwardly. A middle-aged white man leaned to his wife and muttered, "Here we go again." A teenager craned her neck, phone raised, pretending to text but clearly recording. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had seen this scene before, played out in different cities on different scales. The ritual of suspicion, the performance of authority. But this time, the stakes were different. He wasn't just Marcus the Traveler. He was Marcus Ellison, Minister of Transport, on his way to represent the country at an international conference. And yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" The voice came from an older black woman 2 people back in line. She wore a bright scarf and carried herself with the weary defiance of someone who had seen too many moments like this. The male agent turned, his irritation clear. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. We're handling a security issue." The woman snorted. "Security issue? All I see is a man trying to board his plane. What's the problem?" His skin color. Gasps fluttered through the line. The teenage girl's phone angled higher. The female staffer shot a warning look at the older woman. "Ma'am, please. Unless you'd like to be escorted out as well." Marcus raised a hand. Calm. Controlled. Always controlled. "It's fine," he said softly, though every muscle in his body screamed otherwise. But inside, a different voice whispered, "Why should I be the one to calm this down? Why must I always be the one to swallow the fire?" The male agent stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Step out. Now." Marcus exhaled, lifted his suitcase handle, and moved. The walk from the line to the side area felt longer than the entire journey from Baltimore to D.C. He could feel the crowd's gaze, some sympathetic, others accusatory, most indifferent. The staffers led him to a cordoned-off area near the checkpoint. A metal desk stood there, a secondary screening zone. "Place your bag on the table," the agent ordered. Marcus did. His movements were measured, deliberate. Years of training had taught him not to give anyone an excuse to claim he was being aggressive. The female staffer opened the bag, rifling through neatly folded shirts, a stack of policy papers, and a slim leather case that held his speech. She flipped through without care, bending pages, her expression laced with disdain. Marcus clenched his fists. Those words took weeks to craft. They carry the weight of entire communities. And to her, they're just paper. As the search dragged on, Marcus's mind slipped backward to a memory at his family's dinner table years ago. He was 15, sulking after being accused of stealing from a convenience store when all he'd done was browse the snack aisle too long. "Why do they always think it's me, Dad?" he had asked, his voice cracking with both anger and shame. His father, weary from a double shift at the docks, leaned back in his chair. "Son, the world has eyes that see only what they want. You can do everything right and still, to them, you'll be wrong." His mother had reached across the table, touching his hand gently. "But remember this, Marcus, who you are is not defined by their blindness. It's defined by your vision. Don't let them shrink you." Now, standing in that airport, their words came flooding back. But so did the ache. Because no matter how high he had climbed, the blindness persisted. The female staffer pulled out his laptop, turned it over, then shoved it back into the bag. "What's your business here?" she asked flatly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Business? Yes. Why are you flying? Where are you going?" "I have a ticket. You scanned it. You know where I'm going." She smirked. "Answer the question, sir." The word "sir" dripped with sarcasm. Marcus's throat burned. He thought of his keynote address, the words he had planned to deliver about justice, fairness, dignity. Words that, at this moment, felt like a cruel joke. "I'm going to Geneva," he said finally, "to speak at the International Aviation Conference." The male agent chuckled under his breath. "You? Speak at a conference?" The sound was like gasoline on fire. Marcus's chest rose and fell. He wanted to unleash every credential, every title, every accomplishment. But he held it back, for now, because he knew this wasn't the climax. The storm hadn't peaked. Not yet. The female staffer zipped his bag shut with an exaggerated tug, as if punishing the fabric itself. She pushed it across the table, her eyes never leaving his face. "Traveling for a conference, huh?" she said. "That's a new one." The male agent smirked, leaning against the counter. "You know how many people say that? I'm going to speak at some big event. Half of them can't even spell conference." A ripple of laughter came from a small cluster of passengers watching nearby. Not all laughed. Some looked uncomfortable, others annoyed at the delay, but enough chuckled to make Marcus's chest tighten. He looked at them, ordinary travelers, some clutching coffee cups, others fiddling with their phones. Not one of them knew his name. Not one of them knew the laws he had written, the reforms he had passed, the roads and rails that carried their families safely every single day. To them, at this moment, he was just another suspect. "Empty your pockets," the male agent ordered. Marcus hesitated. He had complied at every step, but something in him resisted now. The request wasn't protocol, it was performance. He met the agent's eyes. "I've already gone through security. This is unnecessary." The man's expression hardened. "Are you refusing an order?" A hush fell again. Phones were raised higher. The teenage girl's camera shook slightly with the intensity of what she was capturing. Marcus's pulse hammered. He could hear his father's voice again. "You can do everything right, and still, to them, you'll be wrong." But then another voice rose inside him. His own, sharper, angrier. "How long will you let them strip you down? How many times will you let their doubt define your dignity?" He straightened his shoulders. His voice came out firm, steady, carrying decades of authority. "I will not empty my pockets," Marcus said. "I've complied with every requirement. This has gone far enough." Gasps fluttered across the terminal. The older black woman from earlier clapped her hands together once. "Sharp. Tell him," she said. The agent stiffened. The female staffer's lips curled into a sneer. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have security escort you out. Is that what you want?" For the first time, passengers began to murmur in Marcus's defense. "This is ridiculous," a young man in a suit muttered. "He's clearly done nothing wrong." "He's got a boarding pass," another woman said. "Why are you still holding him?" The tide was shifting, but Marcus knew crowds were fickle. Sympathy could evaporate as quickly as it formed. He couldn't rely on them. This moment, this decision was his alone. Marcus reached slowly into his inner jacket pocket, not to empty it, but to retrieve a single item. A black leather wallet. Sleek, understated. He placed it on the table and flipped it open with deliberate precision. The agents leaned in. The smirk slipped. Inside, nestled against his ID, was a gold-embossed badge. United States Minister of Transport. The female staffer blinked, her bravado faltering. What is this?" Marcus's voice carried like thunder rolling across the terminal. "This," he said, "is who I am. Marcus Ellison, Minister of Transport. The man responsible for the very systems you're abusing right now." The male agent's face drained of color. His lips parted, then closed again, words failing him. Marcus stepped forward, his presence suddenly towering. "I design the routes your cities rely on. I regulate the planes you board, the buses you ride, the trains that carry your families. And yet, here I stand, reduced to suspicion because of the color of my skin." Gasps erupted. The teenage girl's phone shook wildly as she zoomed in on the badge. The older black woman's eyes gleamed with fierce vindication. Marcus's chest heaved as he let the silence hang, heavy and sharp. Then, softer but cutting, he asked, "Tell me, do I still not belong in this line?" The entire terminal froze. The silence after Marcus's question felt like it stretched for miles. Passengers stared, wide-eyed, at the gleaming badge on the table. The teenage girl recording whispered under her breath, "Oh my God!" before realizing her mic was catching everything. The male agent swallowed hard. His bravado was gone, replaced by a clammy uncertainty. The female staffer shifted from foot to foot, her eyes darting toward her supervisor's station as though begging for rescue. But there was no rescue. Not now, because Marcus wasn't just a man defending himself anymore. He had become a mirror, and every single person in that terminal was being forced to look at what was reflected back. The raw ugliness of prejudice laid bare in public. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words rolled like thunder, steady, undeniable. "You doubted me, ridiculed me, humiliated me, in front of hundreds of people. Not because of my actions, but because of my existence. Because you saw my skin first and my humanity second, if at all." The older black woman in the line raised her fist slightly, tears glistening in her eyes. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marcus turned toward the passengers, his gaze sweeping the room. And to those who watched silently, pretending not to notice, this is how it happens. This is how injustice breathes. Not just in the cruelty of a few, but in the silence of the many. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. A man in a business suit lowered his eyes. A mother hugged her child closer. By now, the commotion had drawn higher authorities. 2 airport supervisors and a security officer in Navy uniform. They approached briskly, their faces already tense. "What seems to be the problem here?" one of the supervisors asked. Before the agents could speak, Marcus turned the badge outward. "The problem," he said, "is that I, the sitting Minister of Transport, was publicly harassed, detained, and degraded without cause." The supervisor's eyes widened. He stammered, "Sir, I'm so sorry. This is a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus cut in, his voice sharp as glass. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. And today it stops here." The security officer's jaw tightened. He looked at the agents, both of whom suddenly seemed very small under the weight of the truth. "Step aside," the officer ordered them. His voice carried finality. They obeyed, their shoulders sagging, faces pale. Marcus could have walked away, badge back in his pocket, bag in hand, straight to his gate. He could have saved his words for Geneva, for the conference hall with its polished microphones and applauding diplomats. But in that terminal, surrounded by ordinary travelers, something in him knew. This was the real audience. He took a step forward. The crowd leaned in. "This," Marcus said, gesturing at the shaken staffers, "is why change is still necessary. You build airports with the promise of freedom, but for some of us, that freedom is conditional. You print tickets, assign seats, open gates, and still, you tell us we don't belong." His voice rose just slightly. "I am the Minister of Transport, but today I stand here as a black man in America. A man who can still be doubted, still be disrespected, still be dragged aside as though he were nothing. And if this can happen to me, imagine what happens to those with no title, no badge, no voice." The terminal was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that hummed in the bones. Even the overhead announcement, "Flight 227 now boarding at Gate C14, sounded distant, irrelevant. Then slowly applause began. First from the older black woman, clapping her hands together with fierce energy. Then from the teenage girl, phone still in hand, tears streaking down her face. And then it spread, a wave of claps and cheers rising through the crowd, echoing against the high glass ceiling of the terminal. The 2 agents stood frozen, faces burning under the sound. Marcus closed his wallet with a snap. He picked up his bag, his dignity fully intact, and turned to the supervisors. "These 2 will be dealt with," he said calmly, "but with the weight of an order. And the policies that allowed this to happen will be reviewed. I will make sure of it." The supervisors nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." As Marcus walked back toward the line, the sea of passengers parted for him. Some reached out to pat his shoulder. Others lowered their eyes in shame. He stopped briefly beside the older woman who had spoken up earlier. She smiled, her eyes wet. "Thank you, son," she whispered. Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am. Thank you for not being silent." With that, he stepped back into line. This time, no one dared question whether he belonged. The rest of the boarding process felt different. The once curious stares of passengers were replaced with something new. Respect, even reverence. The same people who had whispered and doubted now stepped aside with lowered gazes, as if ashamed of what they had just witnessed. Marcus walked calmly, but inside, his emotions were a storm. Anger, exhaustion, vindication, all crashing together. He reminded himself to breathe, to stay centered, because his fight was not over. By the time he reached his gate, airport supervisors were already on the phone, scrambling to handle the fallout. The teenage girl's video had hit social media within minutes. By the time Marcus sat down to wait for boarding, it had been shared thousands of times. Within the hour, it was trending worldwide. Minister of Transport racially profiled at U.S. airport. The faces of the 2 agents were everywhere. Their smirks, their condescension, immortalized in pixels. There was no hiding now. 2 days later, Marcus stood on the stage in Geneva, facing an audience of world leaders, executives, and policymakers. But when he delivered his keynote address, he didn't just talk about infrastructure and innovation. He told the story of standing in line at an airport in his own country, treated as though he didn't belong, of how quickly authority can turn into humiliation when tinted by bias, of how freedom of movement, one of the most basic human rights, is still unevenly distributed. And when he finished, the applause shook the hall. Not the polite applause of diplomats, but the thunderous applause of people who knew they had just witnessed truth spoken with fire. Back in Washington, the agents were suspended pending investigation. The airport authority issued a public apology, not just to Marcus, but to every traveler who had endured similar treatment in silence. Airlines began quietly reviewing their training programs, fearful of becoming the next viral scandal. And though change would take time, one thing was certain: the world was now watching. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't just about one man being pulled from a line. It was about the lines we draw, visible and invisible, that tell people where they do or don't belong. It was about the courage to stand tall, even when the world tries to shrink you. And it was about the reminder that silence is never neutral. Silence is complicity, as Marcus himself told the crowd that day in the terminal. Injustice doesn't just live in policies or systems. It lives in moments. Moments where someone is told they don't belong. And in those moments, each of us has a choice: to look away or to speak up. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this: never underestimate your voice. It may be the difference between humiliation in silence and justice in the light. Because next time, it might not be a minister of transport. It might be your neighbor, your friend, or even you. If the story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? How did you respond? And if you believe that stories like this must continue to be told, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Pulse Tales, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the most powerful act is simply not being silent. Until next time, stay aware, stay courageous, and always stand for justice.